Alrighty. Privet, Katila, ja, Ochiharasho, because today we have Orwell and Goode, and hopefully this live stream goes all well and good. Sorry for the pun. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. How's everything going?
Yeah, not bad. Thank you for having me. All good. Just come to America for a few months, enjoyed the sunny weather, escaped the winter because I live in the southern hemisphere, and yeah, promote my new book a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, America's pretty nice. It's do you usually alternate between like during the like winter months you would go down to South America, and then for the summer you would go up to like North America, or is it just like a first time thing for you?
Oh, it's the first time thing coming to America for this amount of time. I'm here for 2 months, but since I live in South America, I'm not much of a winter person, despite coming from Britain. That seems almost paradoxical, but yeah, I'd like to maybe escape the winter in the future. The winter where I live isn't too long and it's not too bad, but still, it's a bit depressing. It's a bit grey and dingy and quite humid and wet at times. So I don't like that. Escape to the southeast for where it's been a bit sunny and it's been nice and warm. So yeah, it's been pretty good.
Yeah, it's for me I kind of like a multitude of I think every season has its own kind of, I guess, unique atmosphere to it, like a unique kind of emotion to it, I guess. Like it kind of evokes a sort of I guess it just depends on your preference, but I kind of like that kind of wide variety of just kind of like, because I think it'd be pretty dreary if it was always winter, and like, if you're up in like Finland, it's always snowy all year round, and or if you're down in like, Africa and it's like just summer all time. And I kind of like it, I guess, like having everything about it. I guess it's just something nice about it. But so I guess we're gonna be talking about his new book, which I want to read. I saw it come out, but I've kind of read like kind of brief excerpts of it, kind of like broad views of it. So it's called it's something about time preferences. And before we get to it, there's one thing I kind of want to get to, which is like, what would you describe yourself as, like your political ideology, or like as personal outlook on life? Like, where do you stand, and like how did you get there?
I don't really subscribe to any core ideology. I would just say that I am a nationalist. I am starting to get into the Catholic faith, and if the closest thing you probably relate me to is probably NRX, so Neo Reaction, but I think that most of my views are just broadly a rejection of liberalism and an idea that the Enlightenment isn't as good as what it's framed to be by the general consensus or by the intellectual establishment. And I think that the current course of events that's running society, Western society in particular, to the ground. And I think that a lot needs to be done in order to repair that and to sort of reverse this trend. So at the moment, we kind of we're stuck in this liberal paradigm. It definitely stems from the sort of the classical liberalism from the sort of late 17th century and 18th century to the present day. And I think that ultimately it has led to a lot of misery for a lot of people. I think a lot of people have a loss of identity. Of course, it's not just liberalism that's at fault here, but there are also elements from modern progressivism, which has become a sort of counter religion to former Christianity under the guise of secularism. So, it's been particularly nefarious in making people sort of follow more of a religious ideology rather than a political one, which is why you have a lot of the kind of the NPC title, which has been very effective because a lot of people don't follow reason or evidence as put out by Enlightenment thinkers, but they actually follow emotions. Kind of, it's oddly enough, it's kind of a counter Enlightenment movement in itself, but it's supposedly following within the paradigm of liberalism. So my I don't really have a fixed ideology. I just don't want to live in Clownwood, if that can summarize what I believe in.
Yeah, I think that's something we all could agree on. The one thing I agree with you on is used to be or at least when I was in a bit of a more darker path in life, I was I was an atheist, and I guess I still am, but I I've kind of come to realization that it's part of the human psyche to always have some sort of calling to the greater have some sort of greater purpose. Because like once I actually got out of that dark path, it's almost impossible to stay. Because I used to be like a nihilist and just a very like, oh, nothing matters and there's no meaning or morals. But it's just like you kind of once you actually get out of that, it's just impossible to maintain that because it's just a I would argue anti-human sort of ideology because it's unless you're because it's that's why I think, as you said, everyone tries to subscribe to some sort of bigger thing. Oh, I feel like I'm fighting for the new civil rights, and I'm fighting for these people, and that's why everyone wants to be part of something, I guess. And so yeah, I think what you hit is pretty hit home. And also, I talked to another neo-reactionary guy, sort of like Endeavor. He's a Canadian guy. He's really good. And me and him discussed about that as well. So I think you and him would be in good company. He's pretty nice. So yeah, so you wrote a book called like about time preferences. So would you like to discuss about like what that book is about?
Yeah, so basically, and like I think after you've done any bit of work, there are some things you sort of, in hindsight, regret. Like but then again, I can't keep fretting about it. The book's already published. It's a done deal. It's a fait accompli. So what time preferences are is just basically how much you value present consumption over future consumption. So somebody with high time preferences is somebody who's geared more towards the present or the immediate. So somebody who is less willing to save funds for future consumption and much rather have fun in the here and now rather than in the future. And of course, there are some reasons for this a priori. For example, people of lesser intelligence are going to have lower impulse control and higher time preferences. But at the same time, the society has become more present-minded, which to me indicates that incentive structures, both social and economic incentive structures, have changed in such a way which makes it possible for people to be more present-minded rather than more future-oriented. So people have high time preferences now because society allows it for sort of gives it the luxury to have high time preferences, if that makes sense. So you have all these economic policies in place which makes it easier for people to live for the moment. And the reason for that is because consequences have been taken out of the equation for the individual who lives for the moment and have been socialized upon others. So taxpayers have to pay for generous welfare state, for example, or these social policies. There's a lot of debt that people can assume which they don't have to pay off now. For example, taking something like gender studies may accrue like a $50,000 debt for you to pay, which you're never going to pay off if you do take a gender studies course, by the way. But that is high time preferences because you want the gratification from studying something like that, which makes you look intelligent, look smart, and it gives you a bit of purpose in the here and now. But the reality is you've got a useless degree which you're never going to pay off in the future. So for most people, I mean, you could strike it lucky and get a very good blogging job at Vice or something like that, which can pay off your bills, or you can run an e-business, which does very well. But that's not for most people. And the other thing is, it's become almost socially acceptable to make these decisions in the here and now, partly because if you're caught judging somebody, since we live in a very sort of egalitarian age, nobody is in a position of authority to judge others. And there's this sort of, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's this sort of rabid intolerance towards people who have arrogated themselves a position where they feel like it's just to be able to judge others for their actions, when in actual fact, it's a form of tough love. So criticizing somebody for going out, drinking a skinful and doing a few lines of coke and sleeping around with strangers, that's an expression of care. It's like, I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want you to overdose. I don't want you to negatively impact your health. I don't want you to catch an STD or get somebody pregnant or yourself pregnant, because those have long-lasting consequences. Now that you're in a position where you can't judge somebody, the information to them of the consequences of their action has been almost embargoed, which means that they will just live willy-nilly for the moment. Of course, this is an extreme example, but throughout a lot of polite society, it's seen as rude to judge people for their actions. And this is a huge problem because people don't have any guidance in life, which is what kind of, as you said, you came from a dark path. So did I. I was very nihilistic in my late teens and early 20s. I think I was a full-on nihilist when I was about 20, 21. And then, things picked up for me. I started developing more of a purpose and finding more meaning in life. And eventually I started coming around and became more open to receiving faith. And here I am now. So I'm in my late 20s and I'm thinking about hopefully starting a family before the time I hit 30, which would be nice. But we'll have to wait and see. But it's all about finding a purpose in life. And I think collectively in the West, we've lost our purpose, we've lost our guidance, we've lost our raison d'etre. And as a result, people are just living for the moment, and they really don't have much else to live for apart from consuming product and getting excited for next product, which is sort of encapsulated in the soy boy meme with the sort of handheld Nintendo consoles.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd add to that is also the way the human beings evolved to look forward. Like there's like a psychological experiments, like if you delayed gratification for a better result in the future, that was something that we like evolved as like human beings. That's because the ability of like forward thing, like, okay, because if we just because that's like what animals do. Animals just kind of look forward to just let me grab on something that I could eat, or what can I get now, like but if they like wait, and what human beings got with our bigger brains is like, well, if we could delay the gratification now, we could try to get something in the future that is even better than if we just pounce now. That's why this forward thinking ideology, instead of like but with modern technology, in a way we're devolving into just this hedonistic self-centered short-term thinking. So in a way we're like going backwards. And as I brought up, the way I got out of my depression is thinking long-term and making long-term goals. That's the only way out, because that's the way it brings you down, is like you think there is no way out. But if you just live in the moment, you're like, well, I'm always suffering day to day. But if you think like, hey, there's a long-term goal and let's get there. There's going to be diversions and everything. But the idea of you looking forward, and instead of just, inflicting upon your, like, I just want to do whatever I want at the moment, you impose upon yourself duties that, I think that like this higher calling is like something that I think everyone's looking for. And I think this is why nihilism's on the rise. And I think this is why multiculturalism's on the rise too, because everyone's like, well, like, what culture do we have? Because American culture, all we have is just mass consumerism and materialism. Like they want like something unique, like, oh, look at these like fresh Mexicans, they have their own unique culture that they haven't subscribed to global, this clown society yet. They have something unique, and that's why they think like, why should I preserve what we have? Because what we have, I just don't. But it's also ironic in a way, because a lot of these types are also talk about climate change, which I'm actually I also talk about environmentalism. But suddenly out of all of a sudden, they suddenly care about long-term consequences. They're like, oh, we have to like try to like transition toward renewable energy, and even that means increased energy costs. We have to do it for the sake of the environment or whatever. But like if you talk about like I don't know, preserving having a better future for for your children, and there's suddenly it's just kind of like, why should we live? You just have to like live and let live and go with the flow or whatever. It's just very it's kind of like they kind of inconsistent with it. And there's a good quote. It's like I don't know the exact, but it's like the societies thrive when fathers put down trees, plant trees they know they won't have to live under.
Mm-hmm.
It's something to that effect. I don't know what, I think I butchered it.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right, and that is the point. So it's very tragic to see how we've kind of conned ourselves into this low level of collective self-confidence, where you feel the need to import all these different divergent and diverse cultures into your society to make stuff better for you in the here and now. And it's very short-term thinking. It's very nihilistic, and it goes to show not just nihilism but self-hatred. And of course, that self-hatred had to have come from somewhere. And we know that there has been this very almost subversive infiltration of Western institutions and the entertainment industry and the media and academia, which have come together and forged this narrative which dictates that Western man is intrinsically evil. He's almost irretrievably evil. There's nothing that can be done in order to save him, which is why there needs to be the sustained mass immigration and sustained hatred and vilification of the white man, to the point where they despise themselves and just basically just prostrate themselves and say, well, let's just import these people from diverse cultures. White people have fucked it up for so long that we need to have these people to show us the way. They need to be the standard bearers to usher in an age of progress that we were incapable of making. They were happy, in scare quotes before we came along and ruined everything for them. And that's the narrative presented to them, which I think it's very well, I think the end result speaks for itself. The kind of people who espouse these progressive ideals, which lives within the purview of the progressive narrative, don't tend to have kids of their own. They tend to live a very sort of selfish and unsatisfying lifestyle, which doesn't really amount to much. I think it's just encapsulated with the male with the soy boy meme, sort of this very consumeristic image, very low T, very emasculated man, and for the woman, this sort of childless cat lady with the pink pussy hat who drinks boxed wine on the weekends. So, which way Western man? The choice is pretty clear, and stereotypes exist for a reason. So anyway, what do you think about
that? Yeah. So for me, sorry, my grandmother came in. Paziba. So yeah, the thing with the one thing you meant, there's a lot of things, the decline of Western civilization is coming from a multitude of kind of ways. And as what we mentioned a little bit earlier is also, there's also this like the idea of first of all, as you mentioned, the idea of self-hatred and the idea of like, well, we're, and it's also what I call like, it's the things we subscribe to from the Enlightenment, like the idea of equality. And the one thing I always mention is I call it the cult equality, because the thing, it's a lot of these like these so-called virtues, like besides freedom, what is like the second biggest thing that our society argues? It's like, oh, freedom and equality. So equality is like embedded as like one of the biggest virtues of our society. But what if the idea of equality as we know it is wrong? Like, what if it's fake? That's why, for example, we're like, wait, why are there certain groups, they're in crime, there's a difference in how certain groups are more criminalized than others? Why are some groups not doing so well in school, or why are some groups this and that? Like, well, because right now this idea of equality is like, well, if everything's equal, then everything can't be then, and if there's something not equal, then there must be some sort of something wrong. That's why everyone's like, well, it has to be racism, or it has to be like, well, why is it that women make 70-something cents to the dollar? Well, it has to be sexism. It can't just be because of forces women to make. Or why is it that women don't go in infantry roles in the military? Could it be biology? Well, no, because men and women are equal. So it's not, the reason why they're not, women aren't going into, the military isn't because we're not giving them toy soldiers when they're young, it's because of biology. So,
sorry, just to butt in, but I think one of the reasons why equality is elevated to such a high position is because it is ingrained in the left-wing metaphysic. I think that's their political point of departure, that all people are equal to a certain way under this sort of materialist paradigm. So once that gets demolished, they've got nothing left. And think of it this way: a lot of left-wing politicians are very good at gathering the support of young people because they believe that everyone's equal. So when they see all this rampant inequality, given sort of all this freedom that people are endowed, it's going to yield just disparate results, because people have differing levels of abilities no matter what, and you can't change that. It's just nature. But when people see all this inequality, all this poverty, you have this constant flow of energy from young people that you can muster at a drop of a hat if you just point to all this inequality you see, which gives these opportunistic politicians the ability to gain power just by pointing to this inequality. I think that's on a macro level a very important point for the left, which they can never ever admit. But I think to a certain degree, it's just embedded into people's psyches because this kind of narrative is always pumped out in Hollywood and in media as well, which so it's almost become an irreplaceable part of the Western consciousness now that people are all equal. But I think, you know, superficially they like to parrot these really nice narratives and all these nice talking points, how they're not racist and all that kind of stuff. But the lived experiences contradict what they are being told all the time, which is why you have this, on the one hand, a lot of misery, and on the other hand, you have this these sort of counter movements like Trump and Brexit coming out because they just do not believe what they're being told. I think their lived experiences contradict everything they have been told by the media and entertainment, which is why they express themselves with these populist movements which destroy the establishment's plans.
Yeah, that's why also I think that's why as people get older, as they experience life, they kind of become more conservative naturally. I think it's because they kind of experience life and realize you don't that hopeful idealism of the youth doesn't, I guess, is not, you can't, that's not really true. That's not, it doesn't always, or most of the time doesn't even work that way in the real world. So that's, a lot of people have these like, oh, I think we could change the world. It's not, you know, it's really hard to change the world. You can't just like, oh, well, that's why I think a lot of people were for Bernie Sanders. I mean, I was part of Bernie, you know, when I was younger, when Bernie Sanders ran, he, you know, I like, you know, because I thought he was going to change the world with the revolution. I mean, at the end of the day, I knew something was wrong with society. I guess, couldn't put my quite a finger on it, but, or I guess like I didn't understand the whole scope of it. But also another thing is also that the modern day right wing in America, I guess in all of the world, in the Western world, is also just kind of co-opted the left wing framework. And this is something that's why I was talking to Endeavor. He has a good series called a new right wing narrative. Basically, you have to because if you believe in equality, it's really hard to fight against the left wing narrative. Because then, if you believe in equality, then with all this inequality, then there has to be something wrong. And you know, they're like, well, we believe in equality, but if we have just the free market, then the free market will fix it. I mean, no, it won't. But you know, it's so there has to be like a new narrative for the right wing. It's like, you know, another idea besides equality is the idea of you know, the Whig history, which essentially everything is going toward like everything's going to get better. It's not you know, we're just slowly becoming more and more better and better. So that's what anyone who thinks we should stop or in fact go back, like the neo reactions, are just simply, you know, wrong. You know, if we just keep being progressive and being more progressive, that's just the future. And you know, a good example of this, for example, is gay marriage. So you know, for example, if gay marriage right now, and how you define gay, if you define marriage as just in the modern sense, which is essentially has been reduced to we just really, 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 really love each other, then there's really no reason to deny gays the right to marry, because it's why. But if you define marriage as a religious and like if you look at it through a religious or traditional view, that it's between a man and a woman, and that we understand that men and women are different, and that marriage and gender roles make sure we get the best of both worlds from the sexes, and that it acts as like a civilizing force on the man and the woman and letting them have a stake for the future, and that also it's for the purposes of having children and create a stable family unit, you know, in which children can thrive and individuals in it can grow and be fulfilled. If we understand that's the view of marriage, that's like the traditional view, you know, then they're like, oh, well, then there's a purpose for it. And because because a lot of people just buy into, you know, that marriage is just a document saying they really love people, but you know, it's so there's just a lot of there's a lot of fundamental, I guess, we have to kind of delve it into the source. And there's, because right now, it's from the media, from the entertainment industry, from everywhere. It's embedded in our culture. And that, but you know, the thing we have to go through is that the fundamental premises of what we base our things on is wrong. So you can't just if you subscribe to the left wing framework, you will lose. You have to,
100% of the time.
yeah. So what's another? So yeah, for that's anything else? So is your book essentially like? Just kind of wrap up on your book. For what else is like? So we talked about the time, how time perfect, how we have to there has to be bigger. I guess we could talk about what things can we do to ensure. Well, I guess we already talked about that. Like what else? So what are some other things that you would like to talk about your book besides the overall theme about it, which is like the idea of looking more into the future? And the way I kind of see it is that it's kind of like you have to look back at your past and your future. You have to see where you came from, because you're not like an atomized individual. There's a long chain going all the way back with your ancestors, and you have to understand they gave you a baton to make the future better. So with that knowledge, then you can make. So you have to look back in your past to make the future better.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, that's the way we could, instead of just living in the here and now, with all this hedonism, we could. This is how we move, look forward. So, I get anything else besides that overarching theme that you would like to add about your book?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So you're right in looking back to your history. I took this sort of ontological point from Heidegger that you need to have this connection to your past in order for the future to remain relevant. If you're disconnected from your past, then the whole concept of the future almost just becomes null and void. I mean, why do you want to have a future if you're kind of rootless? And this is one of a great problem in Western society, especially with the neoliberal order, that everything needs to become sort of rootless and blank slated. Sort of like just like a complete blank slate where everyone's interchangeable, fungible economic units. And just another couple of few things to add into that is the concept of truth is another big point, and this you need to have order. You needs to be a removal of chaos in order for you to have low time preferences. Because why do long-term investments carry a greater risk factor? And the reason is because more things can potentially go wrong between the immediate and the payoff date, which is why they carry a greater risk factor. Now, as truth has become so sophisticated, so complex, in an age where there's counter narratives, meta narratives, people have handheld consoles, handheld devices, people can access social media wherever. The media spouts one thing, then you have sort of the controlled opposition media, as people say, the sort of the Fox News and Daily Telegraph in the UK that supposedly spout right-wing views. Then you have the alternative media. So what is true? And since truth evolves at such a fast pace now, since there's so many narratives that you need to follow, and since the mainstream media almost tells you who to hate and who to love by sort of painting people out a certain way, these are narratives. They're there to evoke an emotion rather than for you to think critically. And the other thing is the evolution of words. Words have been moving at quite a fast pace. So there's two phrases that immediately come to mind. One is people of color and colored people. Colored people's fine 10 years ago. People of color is fine now, but colored people isn't. And then you have the word queer, which has evolved from the 70s. So in the 70s, it was fine. In the 2000s, it wasn't fine. And now it's better than fine. It's an empowering term.
Yeah,
So,
and then suddenly now, just for as we talked about like current events, Steven Crowder called this like Mexican Marxist like gay guy on Vox like a lispy queer and all that, and now suddenly that's offensive or something. But but I thought it was empowering. Like, oh no, so
yeah, no, that's funny. I mean, he calls him a lispy queer, but if he says I'm a lispy queer, then that's fine. If he himself admits it, that's to be celebrated. I mean, there's quite a funny meme of like a stage with a rapper, and one of them, the white guy comes on and says "fuck them hoes," pardon my French, and then everyone's booing him, and then the black guy comes on and says "fuck them hoes," and everyone's cheering. So I mean. There's a lot of context, and they do want to say that everyone's equal, that all the races are the same, and all that kind of stuff. But okay, if there's all this sort of implied white privilege, then mixed race public figures always tend to identify as black. Do they not want to have some of that privilege? So we just live in a world where truth has been inverted, and there's so many different variants of the truth. I do believe there is an objective truth out there. I do believe that truth does reveal itself to you eventually at some point. But I think the sort of the epistemological starting point of liberalism is where you use reason and evidence. Well, given the fact that there are so many narratives and so many different paradigms, you can use reason, you can fudge data, in order to back a certain narrative of your own, which is why you have these huge disagreements and these huge sort of ideological separations between left and right. And that's just looking at it in broad terms. So you can be reasoned into almost any position if you have the intellectual faculty to do so, which is a huge problem, in particular when you have all this information at your fingertips. So who knows what to believe anymore? And now you're adding more cultures, more religions into the mix. What do you think is going to happen? This is another one of the reasons why people have become so present-minded. People just want to tune out. This is why they watch TV, and the TV tells them to live more present-mindedly than before.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it's the thing with one thing I'd that we just thing with truth the thing with like truth is also just the way we're like the framework that we're coming toward it. For example, if you believe in the self-determination of people, if you believe, which is kind of weird, like, you know, if you talk to a lot of left-wing people, and I do, you know, they talk about the independence of Palestine or the independence of Kurdistan or whatever. That's it's like an ethnic nationalist idea. You know, self-determination of an ethnic group or a religious group or a cultural group, a linguistic group. The idea they have the right to have their own state to determine their own affairs is a, you know, a very, I think, something everyone agrees with. And but suddenly, you know, if a Palestinian says we don't want to be subjugated by Israel, they're like, yes, for the Palestinians. And then like in the next, you know, but if someone, say, from Denmark suggests that Denmark should remain a Danish state instead of a, you know, multicultural mongrelized shithole, you know, it's like, oh no, that's racist. So it's kind of, you have to come from it with this different, because if you don't believe, if you're like, well, I just don't care that if everyone just gets mixed away into a singular race and we all become this globalized consumeristic society, it's like, well, if you don't believe in that, I mean, in fundamentally, we just can't, even if it's just a fundamental difference in our ideology. Because I was talking to a left-wing social democrat, Pauly Dice, and he's a nice friend of mine. But when we were talking about immigration, it's because, you know, he doesn't see a problem with, you know, immigrants. You know, just if America becomes less white, that shouldn't matter. You know, but so when I talked to him, I'm like, well, don't you think it's not, you know, because I was talking to him about foundations. If I believe fundamentally that, say, Poland should remain Polish, but he doesn't really care, then who care? Like, that's why, you know, cares if we take more immigrants, if Poland takes from people from other parts of the world. Because if we just come at, it's not just truth too, it's also just where we're getting it from. And that's why you have to attack it at the source of what their like mindset. And I don't think you could like deconstruct it in just one day. You have to, it takes over a period of time to kind of make them realize the deficiencies in their thing. What made me come out of my Sanderist like kind of ideology, like my social democrat, like left-wing kind of view, is the migrant crisis, you know, and the kind of Donald Trump kind of kind of talked about illegal immigrants, and I was in that populist wave, and I kind of like, wait a second. So the first thing was the Paris attacks, which kind of woke me up. But I'm like, oh, that's bad, but that's because of American foreign policy. Like, I didn't get that it was actually an Islamic thing. I mean, and we could talk about, you know, foreign policy, but I think it's mostly, a lot of people, like, that's the same thing with, you know, the idea of equality, you know, like, well, if Islam can't be different from Christianity, you know, I mean, if you admit that, you admit some ideas are more unequal than others, and that can't be right. But anyway, so that's why I was kind of still stuck in that worldview. But then it was the clone sex attacks that I think what really got me, because I'm like, wait a second, the German government is covering up these attacks. I'm like, wait a second, that something's wrong. And then I looked up all the grooming things that were happening in England, all the crime statistics, the terrorist attacks, and I'm like, wow. So there was just a lot of things that just changed my worldview, and it has to deconstruct this idea that I had in my mind, and it takes a little bit of a while. And also another thing is the this high, like, this utopia the left wing wants. They want like a welfare state and everything. Like, they're like, oh, let's look at, like, I want to talk to Norway and Sweden and Denmark. That's the society I want. But what they don't realize, the reason why that welfare state can exist is because of a high trust society. They can't. The reason why, if there's a study done, I forgot the study, but they show that in more diverse neighborhoods, people are less willing to like do community organizing or to vote, to, you know, help out others. So when a welfare state requires high taxes, for example, people in a high trust society, a homogeneous society like Denmark or Norway, especially back when they first created these welfare states in the late 20th century. There was, it was like 95% Danish, and most of the immigrants were from from Europe. And it's they were willing to give almost half their income for because like, hey, look, I know the state, because I know, I have this like connection with other people. I want to give my money and I want to help everyone else around me. But I think it's also, as we become more atomized, it's the less we feel at home, the less we have an identity, the more we could consume, the more we become we have low time preferences, as you mentioned in your book. And I think this is why corporations and the big business support that, because then we don't have some sort of identity to root in. We just become these mass consumer slaves where we just consume at whatever's on TV. And like, well, why should I care about, because I'm just some individual in this like mongrelized world full of all these languages and cultures, and I'm just this guy. I'm just a white man. Why should I care? I mean, I'm part of the same group of people that massacred everyone. I'm the white people did not the Nazi shit, or I'm an American and I did the American Indian genocide. So they feel kind of, so it's all these things that kind of make brought down. And so the idea in an ironic way for the left wing idea to work, it's you have to have a high trust homogeneous society. They kind of laugh at that whenever I mention. They're like, oh, that's you just saying only white people have a homogeneous, like only could have a welfare state. But it's true. The only way we could have the idea their perfect society come about is a high trust, because it's not just economics, there's a culture to it. And it's the same way with freedom. You can't just have perfect freedom, you have to have a moral society, like that has a strong moral foundation, because that's what the founders didn't believe. Oh, the idea of freedom is for you to inject yourself with heroin and watch hardcore pornography. That's not what they thought of freedom. They thought of freedom as you being able to do what you want, but like there's a foundation, like there's a set foundation to it. It's not you do whatever you want, it's you do a moral life, and you kind of, it wasn't like a free-for-all, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I absolutely get what you mean. I do come from a libertarian background, which is where I picked up time preferences, and I got interested in it. And I'm actually very thankful that my views evolved and changed from the libertarian perspective before writing this book, because I was planning on writing this book a few years ago when I was still a libertarian, and it would have just been in a purely economic realm. And I'm thankful that I have read postmodernist philosophy. I have picked up other views. I have read a wide range of writers since developing my interest in time preferences. But yeah, what I wanted to add to that was the fact that things like social democracy isn't great for lowering social time preferences. It's going to make people more present-minded. But you're absolutely right. You need to have a stable, homogeneous society in order to have a welfare state where immigration is either heavily restricted or very controlled. So to the point where you're not going to change the demographic, and you're going to be sure that the people that you do get into your society are ones who are going to contribute and not take out. And this is one of the problems that we're seeing now, that many of the people who are coming from third world countries are consuming welfare at a disproportionate rate. And not only that, it's subsidizing their unsustainable birth rates in comparison with the native population's birth rates that are below the level of replacement. So what you're seeing here is the dysgenic pattern in economic terms, where you're punishing the best and brightest members of your society through higher tax rates, and they won't be able to afford to have kids. They're going to have both parents in the workforce, which means that the kids aren't going to get the best upbringing. They're not going to be able to have as many kids as others. And the people who are lazier, or people who aren't as productive, have the ability to claim more welfare per child. Of course, they are talking about capping this, but at the same time, welfare has been destigmatized. It isn't a bad thing to be on welfare. And look, I mean, people do get on hard times, and it's human nature. But what I'm suggesting is there needs to be better, more equitable and voluntary ways to provide help to people who need it, because there always are going to be people who need it, but they can't just be like baby gumball machines and just live off the state for the rest of their life, because it's not fair on the rest of us. And then you can talk about the illegitimacy of the way that other tax funds have been squandered. I'm not here to discuss that, but the fact of the matter remains that in order to have these generous welfare programs, you need to have ethnic homogeneity. There's no two ways about it. I mean, people always present Sweden and Norway and Finland as these pinnacles of how wonderful the social democratic project is, but the ethnic homogeneous component of these countries, and they don't talk about how they have a relative amount of economic freedom and low tax rate, low corporate tax rates, in order to provide the resources to continue that welfare experiment. And even then, it's very, very difficult to keep afloat because for Sweden in particular, they have to monetize themselves out of the debt because interest rates flew up to about 1,000% in the early 90s. So, even then, it doesn't work. I mean, from a political standpoint, if you ran on a ticket which promised the abolition or the reduction of the welfare state, you're never going to win. No, not in a million years. I mean, people have an emotional attachment to it. But I'm just saying, from an abstract point of view, that welfareism isn't a good idea at all. But in the real world, if you want to win politically, you're going to have the welfare state in place. You've got to pledge that it's not going to be touched because people are dependent on it, and bureaucrats are dependent on the jobs in providing that welfare to people as well. So you need to kind of pick your battles right. And if you want, I think that what needs to be done is more than just a sort of political overhaul. You need to have an overhaul in consciousness. You need to get rid of the prolonged brainwashing of the average Westerner, the change in consciousness of the average Westerner since the 1950s and 60s, through the civil rights era, through the introduction of the critical theorists, the New Left, the French existentialists, the French post-structuralists, and all these kind of philosophies which have very much dampened the Western psyche and ridded them of their own self-confidence, which you're going to have to do something where there needs to be an institutional change, but you need to get the money to do that. And in the present condition, and I even talk about this in the book, that as time preference is linked with intelligence, intelligent people who've been through the education system tend to be overwhelmingly on the left. So sustaining this neoliberal global experiment is in their interest, in their low time preference interests. Because it ensures more stability and status for their children rather than sort of a little England nationalism or sort of an isolationist approach.
Yeah. I agree. For me, I can't. I mean, I agree with you that but for me, so the reason why I used to be a libertarian like a long, long time ago when I was younger, like even before I was a Sanders young person. But I almost bordering on anarchism, to be quite honest. But I kind of the reason why at the moment I don't really subscribe to kind of free market economics. I kind of subscribe to the idea. I mean, I'm a capitalist, but I kind of believe economics should serve the the general the what values we put in our society. So, as a conservative, we need, what are some conservative social values? Well, when we have a welfare state, and so for my idea, so we need to reform the welfare state, but what the welfare state needs to do is preserve what we want to preserve. If we need to have a welfare state that doesn't subsidize single families, but instead promotes the idea of stable, a man and a woman having lots of kids. Like, I'd be more than willing to have governments giving payments to, if in Denmark, for example, if I use Denmark because it's a bit of an offensive term. No one knows where Denmark is, but so, if sorry, I'm just going to use Denmark for examples. But like, if the Danish government was going to give Danish mothers, hey, every child you have, we're going to give you this much assistance to increase the birth rates, I'll be totally fine with that. We want to promote families. We want to promote schools that promote a sort of the sense of nationalist belonging. Like, we teach the right type of history, not a self-hating history, but a truly patriotic one, that we observe. Like, we have our ups and downs, but we're a glorious people. Here's the sacrifices of our ancestors. We pay for people's education, or we pay for people's, and we want to enforce, like, we want to have healthy living. And so my idea is, so we, instead of, like, I believe, I'm still a capitalist. I'm not I don't believe in, like, that we should seize the means of production. I still believe that people should be able to create business and kind of change, like, trade with themselves. I just think government policy on terms of economics should guide us toward it's kind of like, the candidate Andrew Yang who's running. He
Mm-hmm.
wants to replace the GDP, the way we measure GDP, with like more human qualities. Like, for example, if we lay off a ton of people through automation, but overdoses are rising, suicides are rising, families are breaking up, the environment quality is going down. But yet, if the GDP is going up because the very rich are getting rich from all this automation, I mean, is that a healthy economy? We have to reorient what we think of a healthy economy, and I think it's not a healthy society if we have a society that has families breaking apart, and we have less birth rate, and we're there's a lot of qualities that we could measure, success or business entrepreneurship or whatever. There should be a lot of more. We should use economics to push our conservative agenda and enforce that but I agree with you that the welfare state shouldn't be right now as it is right now, where it just is used as kind of like a cow udder where people just come in and just could leech off of it. It should be used to promote an agenda, not, I guess, but it shouldn't be the way it is now, I should say.
No, I completely agree with you. And I mean, I used to be very into Austrian economics. In fact, my master's degree is in economics. And, the one thing that actually drove me away from anarcho-capitalism, because I was an ANCAP for like a year and a half or something, was the fact that I read Heidegger's Being and Time, and he talks about sort of certain authenticities of being. And I was just thinking back throughout history and thinking of all the economic policies each country has had. And the only thing close enough to anarcho-capitalism was like a 20-year period while the West in America was being made. So during Manifest Destiny, when you had all these westward expansions of America, that's pretty much the only time you had similar to an anarcho-capitalist society. And I thought about the economic history of places like Germany, which Prussia was one of the first, Prussia was one of the first places which toyed with the idea of a welfare state. And then you have places like France, which has always been pretty socialistic. Spain's been pretty socialistic. And the only country that's really been pro laissez-faire, with the exception of Holland, historically, was Britain. But that was sort of a fraudulent version of laissez-faire. It was very militaristic and very state-run. So, the experiment with liberalism was very fraudulent there. I was kind of thinking, well, people have emotional ties to things. People aren't all these rational actors as the liberal mentality almost dictates. In actual fact, people have emotions. And I started thinking, well, if you're going to win politically, people don't respond to reason. They respond to what they're used to and to emotions. So, which is very effective to have pictures of like the refugee crisis or all these illegals that get deported at the border. You have these crying children. That resonates with the kind of the childless left-wing woman, the sort of the 20-year-old, 25-year-old, 30-year-old, or the future cat lady who haven't got kids of their own. So the maternal instinct kicks in, and that's a powerful emotional response. And the other point is that nobody's going to die for neoliberalism. Who the fuck's going to lay down lives for just a gradual increase of the GDP? Nobody. But people are going to die for their country. People are going to die for their family. People are going to die for their faith. And I've come to the conclusion that to die for, you got nothing to live for. I mean, what's the point of you being alive if
you have nothing to live for?
Yeah, I mean, you literally have nothing to live for apart from just sort of a combination of fleeting dopamine and insulin hits, and that's it.
Yeah, and if you see there's some polls come out from Western Europe. They're like, will you be if someone invaded your country, would you be willing to like lay down your life to kill, fight and die for your country? And it was like abysmal. It wasn't even like none of them cracked 50%. I don't think.
No.
I think Germany was like 13%. This is 13. So imagine like a lot of these people. I go to like I go to Reddit sometimes. I go to like the Europe subreddit, and they're like, we need to like go fight. Take out Russia from Ukraine. They're violating their sovereignty. Like, who the fuck's gonna? Sorry, but like who in the world's gonna fight for in a coalition to take Russia out of like Crimea? No one's when 13% of your population isn't going to like lay down their lives for their own country. So if Russia invaded Germany, or I don't know exactly what country it was, but like when only like 20% of your population is going to lay down their lives to fight, why in the world would they like fight Russia, who out of Ukraine? No one's going to do that. And yeah, and it's exactly what you. It's just no one's gonna. The thing with that makes us human is, in a way, having long term. We're building toward a better future. That's we're always marching toward something that something better, and just living in the moment. It's very it's very it's not, you're not made for that, and this is why, for example, just in my personal life. So I just got out of high school about a year ago, and
Hmm.
I joined the United States Marine Corps. However, I went to boot camp in Paris Island, but I didn't complete it. It wasn't something for me. So I went there for about 2 months. I didn't complete it. Now I'm trying to go into the United States Air Force. Now it's been about 6 months, and I've been working with my recruiter. But in that 6 months, I've been just kind of going to the gym sometimes, kind of making some videos, but I haven't really done something something yet, and it's killing me. It's very doing nothing. Like, I mean, in a way, a lot of people are like, oh, imagine not having to do anything in your life. It's horrible having have nothing in your life. I know the only thing that's keeping me kind of sane in a moment is like the idea of like finally enlisting and going off. But it's just, I can't imagine just like not doing anything for all your life. It's just, yeah. So it's just, I think, a human thing for us to just look into the outs, into the is a future outlook, and it's not just the here and now, but our society is building that, and it's as you can see, the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And the end result is sort of very low self-confidence, very low T, very effeminate, and very paranoid and myopic society, which, which which is sort of crystallized in the clown world meme, because we have an inversion, and this is what the left is very good at. They're revolutionaries, and well, what's the definition of revolution? It's to turn something around. And what they've done is an inversion of traditional morality, of the natural order, and just sanity in general. A lot of the times you see these sort of before the stream, I saw an article where there was a drag performance at an elementary school. Like,
God,
what on earth is going on? What's happening there, big
I,
guy?
I actually, my idea is, I'm kind of starting to believe this. I know I don't want to subscribe everything to biology, but I legitimately think that, I think there's even studies on this, but I think people's political ideology, a lot of it, like 40% of it, comes from their parents. Like, they could,
Yeah.
one thing, I visited California with a friend of mine, to San Diego, and I've heard San Diego isn't as bad as all the other places in California, but it's, when I was there, holy damn, there was there's just homeless people everywhere. There was no sense of order. There was, people were just there's mentally ill on the streets, people all over the sidewalks, graffiti and shit, and there's just rainbow flags everywhere. I think there was more rainbow flags than American flags, to be quite honest, or equal amount. But there was just, just rampant, just everything was broken down, and there was no sense of order to it. And I stayed with a lot of I used it was like couch surfing, where essentially people allow you to like live in their place, stay at their place. And I mean, I met a lot of like liberal people, and I think they mean the best of intentions, but it seems to me that there's like some, I don't know if it's pathological altruism, but they just have some sort of preference toward disorder, but they seem to actually like the idea that their thing wasn't orderly and all perfect and all that. That the idea of them living among degenerates and just seemed kind of like it's like, this is actually unique and very cool and very, I guess, enriching or something. It's just very, I don't know the exact word for it. I'm like, well, I just can't imagine just living amongst, and maybe this is also where I get maybe some of my, I guess, I mean, I don't subscribe to a lot of left wing ideology, but I'm not like perfectly ordered sometimes. Like sometimes I there's like sometimes I just have this little bit of a disorder in my life. Like I don't have everything perfectly done, but I get, there's some things I've kind of come to the realization that things are just kind of, I don't want to say it, but I think it's, politics might be like almost biological. I think
It is.
yeah.
It is to a large degree. It's 40 to 60% heritable, and of course that's going to be sort of self-propagated within the society you live in. So the natural order of things is to be nationalistic and to become more conservative as you age, and to be okay with things such as hierarchy, and to
Hmm.
be okay with certain things that would be deemed problematic now. And one of the problems is that a lot of the ideological progenitors that we have in the universities are people who, I don't know if you're familiar with Edward Dutton, but he would call them mutants. So you have this. I come up with a few coinages here and there. So you have this like de-Darwinization of the natural order. So you have this sort of inversion of the natural order since the Industrial Revolution, where people who wouldn't have survived under more under harsher conditions are surviving now, and they have the ability to propagate their ideas throughout these institutions. So like the really fat, unsightly probably wouldn't have been able to survive, say, 500 years ago. But now, not only are they surviving and thriving given our calorie dense diets that we have now, but at the same time, they're able to put their very sort of antisocial ideas into a position where it can be sort of seeping into the consciousness of a lot of young people, young adults who will live to reproduce those ideas, even though they might go and have kids themselves. And the fat feminist who works in administration university doesn't. Fact of the matter is, these ideas live on while they don't.
Yeah, have you there's a movie that I think, or a book I think, it's called Idiocracy or something, where the premise is essentially all the rich intelligent people don't have any children, and then all the poor uneducated people have all the children, and then essentially you have a bunch of low IQ stupid people running in a democracy running the whole show, and we end up in clown world. It's kind of like that's the idea of it. That kind of made me what you were mentioning kind of reminded me of that I think book. There was um what was it? The what was it? So there well, God, I just slipped my mind for some reason. Damn. Wait, can you remind me what you were mentioning earlier? It might click my head. It's just like for some reason I had a thought in my head and then it just like disappeared. What were you saying? Like a little bit.
When just now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, it's kind of eluded me now, but
Something got out of my head.
but
Jesus.
oh, okay. So you have a lot of people who are surviving at unprecedented rates who wouldn't have. And I'm not saying,
Oh yeah,
I'm obviously just to quickly put a caveat here, disclaimer
yeah.
here. I'm not saying that these people should ideally, not exist. I'm just
Yeah.
using it as a sort of ideological, sorry, as a sort of a thought experiment that a lot of people who wouldn't have survived otherwise are surviving now
Yeah.
and are being able to sort of foist their worldview upon others, even though they don't reproduce themselves.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I just got my idea back. So a lot of people try to blame like the idea of like low birth rates on like now it's true, but it's like part of the picture. The idea of like when there's more education, more healthcare, and more development, you have a lower birth rate. However, the idea is also that's not really true for. But if the more traditional you are, the more religious you are, the more conservative you are, it's shown that you actually have a higher birth rate than liberals and more left leaning individuals. And I think I like Mormons, for example, their average birth rate is like three babies per woman, and and the average American is like 1.8 or something like that. It's below replacement, but the Mormons are having a ton, and the Mormons are living like us. They're not living in a log cabin devoid of everything. They're they have modern amenities and everything, and so it's also if you have subscribed to a conservative, and the more religious and conservative you are, and if you have more, I guess, as we mentioned before, looking back is the way you look forward. And in a way, progressives kind of just want to go forward and just in like a bullheaded way without any sort of background to it. And but we kind of like see that we're getting handed a baton to make something greater of ourselves for the future. That's why when we move forward to the future, we refer to our past, whilst progressives just want to move toward the future for the sake of just going toward the future. Um, so it's I think with that's why there's a higher birth rate. And that's why, for example, a lot of people think, oh, these like really traditional Muslim people, they'll move into the West and then they'll stop having babies because they'll end up like us. They'll become mass consumerist, slaves as well. It's like,
Mm.
well, first of all, that's a bit depressing. But I mean, second of all, um it's they have this like unless they drop their Muslim thing, they just become part of clown world as well. Like maybe their Islam gets overrun, and it becomes just a neutered version like Christianity has. It becomes just they just unless that happens, I don't know, because they're segregating themselves in all these European capitals and all that, so they're like maintaining their way of life. So I don't see it changing, but they'll keep making lots of babies because they have a more forward looking outlook, unlike the more kind of secular minded Europeans.
Right, and they also have a purpose to do so. It's underpinned by divine, whereas what is the Western divine underpinning now? I mean, it's a sort of dying out Christianity or progressivism. And progressivism, the sort of the logos of progressivism dictates that white Western man is evil, which just instills nihilism. So what's the purpose of modern progressives to have kids? Well, there is none.
Yeah.
And if they do, they're just given up to daycare because they probably live in an environment which backs up female empowerment, which means that women have to be in the workforce with the man, and they don't have time to raise a kid themselves. They're off sort of gallivanting or competing with men in some cold cube, marginally rewarding, economically rewarding job, and that's about the limits of their existence. And I think it's very, very sorry, because it's narrow, it's incredibly narrow, and it's not satisfying. And I think that the progressive logos prohibits them from going out and sort of seeking something which yields greater meaning, because it would ruin the whole ethos of progressivism. And this is just one quick thing. Like, my prediction is that the clown world meme is going to get even worse. And the reason for that is that a lot of progressives are atheistic, and that's not an accident.
Mhm.
Atheists haven't sort of lost their faith, they've just transferred it in many ways. And a lot of it has been a sort of a revolt against Christianity. Progressivism can be identified as a secular religion in the place of Christianity. It's just more of an anthropomorphic religion. You can kind of assign deities or sort of semi-deities to like statesmen, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So since they've rejected Christianity, and Christianity was the order, losing faith in the progressive church, or the cathedral, as Molbach puts it, would be to actually stare down nihilism straight in the face. Progressivism is kind of like a safety net for nihilism.
Yeah.
And once they lose that, well, they literally have lost the last thing to live for, the last thing that gives them hope or purpose.
Yeah.
Once they've lost this investment in the narrative, they can't go back to Christianity because they spent their whole life condemning it, which is why you see a lot of feminists going to Islam.
Yeah, no. I actually, you're. I mean, at least in my personal life, that's actually exactly what happened to me. As I started very, slowly and steadily got out of my depression and very nihilistic phase, I became. At first, it was like just a battle against Christianity, right? It was just, oh, I'm fighting against Christianity, and I'm trying to. I'm so enlightened. I figured out there's no God. Now I'm the most intelligent person in the world. I was, it was like that, and I kind of, but the thing is that that's not enough. I always thought of myself, oh, I'm just this cold, hard facts, logic, robot with no feelings whatsoever. Because I'm an atheist, whatever. But I'm what I kind of came to the realization is that and then that but then when Bernie Sanders came around, I kind of, it was a mass move. It was going to be a revolution. We're gonna change this world that I've been always so I've been always so depressed about. I was still stuck in them. They're going to change the world. We're going to change things for the better. And there's this kind of savior like figure. And, it's almost, when you make it like that, it's almost, the comparisons are almost, as we mentioned before, it's almost like, we always yearn for some sort of purpose in our lives. And, and sometimes, that's what, a lot of people, what we have to do is transition people from this progressive worldview. And even if people are apolitical, they've kind of ingested the narrative. That's why it's easy to subscribe to progressivism and liberalism instead of like, right wing reactionary, because it's against the tradition, our cultural like mindset that's been established throughout the ages. And so you have to fight against that. And uh, what was it? Once you And then once you what was it? Let me see, what was I trying? Oh yeah, and also in a weird way, for what you were talking about for feminism, It's actually in a weird way like a rejection of freedom. A lot of people talk about freedom, but I have like a different idea of what freedom means. Like I don't think freedom, like I think in a weird way the what we get in our lives is there's a more better, like I think freedom is the idea of having a family. Freedom is the idea of, you know, having purpose and having a forward thinking ideology. You know, like having like a home you could call your own, or having duties upon yourself. Hey, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. It's not, freedom isn't, as I mentioned before, watching hardcore pornography, injecting yourself with heroin. That's not you know, that's not freedom. And I think the idea, like feminism's kind of like taught women that the idea um of just of you having a husband and you having children is some sort of oppressive ideal, and you know, working for a faceless multinational corporate soul-sucking corporation in a cubicle is somehow a liberating experience where you make $40,000 a year making PowerPoints. I mean, that, I don't know. I mean, now you're truly free, and you're free when you're, you know, you get used like some sort of like meat bag for, you know, throughout your 20s, and then you become some sort of like shriveled, you know, and then you become nothing, and your entire existence amounts to nothing except, you know, rave parties and, you know, smoking blunts and everything, and there's nothing to it. There's nothing. It's just, again, it's this it's horrible. You know, it's against human nature, and we have, that's why we, as you wrote in your book, we need to readjust the way we do our time preferences. And also, I just finally figured out what I was going to talk about a little bit earlier. The as we move forward, we have to transition people from a progressive mindset to a more, where to changing it slowly by slowly to a more right wing view. And then they have to finally, and because like for me, and maybe I'll find my faith someday, and you know, maybe you could help me out on that. But I'm still an atheist, but I kind of call myself a cultural Christian, if that makes any sense. I know it sounds kind of, you know, stupid, but I understand Christianity is needed to support some sort of like a moral foundation, or at least a cultural foundation, and in our lives. And I kind of think that there has to. I understand like the way religion is important for our lives. I just the the for but we needed what we need to do is transition people from instead of trying to adopt progressive orthodoxy to replace that void they have in their hearts. We need to transition them to the more correct mindset, and then eventually say, hey, we could find meaning in our lives through family, through our communities, through our nations, and through a higher idealism, and that could be God. And you know, that's the what we have to, you know, that's how, what we're trying to transition them to.
Right. But I think one of the things to bear in mind is that on their side, because if it were on their side, they wouldn't need to be going around censoring people. They wouldn't need to constantly promote this narrative. And in regards to that, you know, when some people say the left can't meme,
Mm-hmm.
they certainly can meme, but their memes are Hollywood movies. Their memes is the mainstream media. Their memes is modern fiction. Their memes control all the institutions. It's woke capital. It's a sort of the so-called globo homo. All these things are left-wing memes. Now, do you know what the right can meme? It can meme to disaffected normies who go onto the internet who aren't 100% convinced with everything that they're being told, which is why it's very marketable in places like social media. What I've recently realized is that memes are becoming far less prominent on social media. Now it's just the sharing of articles. It's almost as if there's been this collective nihilism or collective loss in a coherent movement among the right. And you can notice this on social media. For example, my Twitter engagements are dwindling. My account grew in 2017. I got up to like 55,000 followers. In 2018, I increased it to 82, and now I'm barely above 84. So whether it's them tinkering with the algorithms or whether it's our message just being dampened or diluted, I don't know. It's probably a combination of both, but there certainly seems to be like a sort of this feeling of sadness because underneath Trump there was a reason the right was energized, but now that
Yeah.
Trump has been a bit of a wet fart in his time in office and he hasn't enacted any of the things that really got him into power, then I think there's this just a huge sigh of disappointment, really. So we're just going to have to go see what's going to happen going forward. But the truth is on our side. We have shown the world that there are these problems, and what the media done is had to go fucking full R word in order to stop people like drifting off the reservation. It has to promote things like the Covington incident. It had to promote Jussie Smollett. It had to hide other things as well. It had to overinflate sort of the New Zealand shooting, and they need to have all these inquiries into the so-called far-right movements, and now they're taking people off of YouTube. Well, they're doing that because they know that we pose an existential threat to their narrative and their position of power, no matter how small and decentralized we are at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's also the same thing that happened with, and I was a bit too young for it, but like for Barack Obama, from what I've seen from a lot of these progressive commentators, they thought Obama was going to usher like a whole progressive agenda because they're like, oh, he's going to change the world, and then and then when he came into office, he didn't really do as much as the much change that they wanted. He didn't. He just kind of became a normal Democratic president, and
Hmm.
so I think it's also I think there's a bit of this is a critique of democracy. Me and Endeavor were talking about. It's not really I think it's not that democracy itself is intrinsically a bad idea. It's that right now the democracy we have in America, and I think in the Western world, is that there's a unaccountable deep state. If I may be a boomer for a second, but
Hmm.
like a deep state that just kind of is there. The presidents come and go, but they kind of are the ones who set policy, and it doesn't. Obama gets in, he allows federal fund, he increases the top tax rate to 40%. Trump gets in, he cuts it to 35, and they get to have some changes, but they can't radically change the system in the ways they want. I think there's like this like kind of in our governments, there's just a unaccountable bureaucracy that just kind of stays in power and is never voted on, and everyone just kind of presidents go in and out, but it just never changes. So I don't think I think it's very depressing, as he said, because it's like, well, if we can't democratically get the things done, then what can we do? And then that's obviously we can't really do violence, but so it's like what can we do? It's very depressing. And yeah, the thing with the memes is that I've kind of come to the realization. The thing with memes is that they can't be. Nicholas Fuentes, he was like talking about how memes. The reason why they're funny is because they're edgy. They penetrate the meaning. They make us. It's just so absurd and so like they counterpunch what we've been brainwashed to. That's why I think left wing memes, unless they're like I've seen a lot of funny like communist memes, like anarchist memes, because they're not so accepted, at least in America, but like they're sufficiently lefty edgy that they could be funny. But like a lot of I haven't seen a lot of the reason why a lot of right wing memes, at least in the far once you get more to the center right, they become so like boomery. It's absurd. But
Hmm.
but I think in the dissident right, we it's a lot. There's the memes are good because it tinges on. It's like trying to poke at it's a it's almost like taboo in a way. And so I guess I get a bit. There's a bit of a people are gravitating toward that, and because I think in their hearts they know it's true. They're like, well, I think there's something wrong with this world, and they know this prevailing world order isn't true, so they're trying to change it, and they're like, oh, this is actually finally points to it. But even if it's kind of wildly exaggerated and simple, there's like this meme, this one of the girls who went to my school, she's like this regular liberal Democrat person, and she's like, he's like, people say that the millennial generation isn't funny anymore. We're the funniest generation in a while. We just can't, we just can't stand racism, and we want to figure out ways to get out of our history class. I'm like, that's not funny, you whore. That's stupid. It's just so like they think they're being edgy. Like, oh, we guess what? We're fighting racism. That's that's not like, because that's just something regular. It's like, oh, guess what? I ate breakfast today. It's like, so it's just so not. I guess there's not a it doesn't go against like the traditional narrative, and that's why memes, they're very simple. They could communicate messaging, and if you look throughout history, that's what takes down prevailing world orders is information. and being able to spread information so fast to a lot of people like social media does with memes, and that's why you see mass censorship. So because they can't let a repeat of 2016 happen.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think that people as a whole need to realize that the nature of power has changed significantly since the French Revolution. That was the straw that broke the camel's back, because since then we've seen just such an unparalleled rise in the growth of technology that now all this information we have at our fingertips. And as I said earlier, there's all these competing and conflicting narratives and meta narratives out there. So for a lot of people, in order to decode all this information, that, who knows what framework to subscribe to, and most people subscribe to the liberal framework which we are still living in. That's the prevailing social order. This sort of implicit idea that everyone is a rational agent to a certain degree, and we use reason and evidence. But as I've already explained earlier, I mean, reason can be co-opted to explain reason people into any form of situation. As long as people have had a priori experiences, you can be reasoned into a lot of things. And now that the nature of power is so different to what it was, like power, especially when it comes to punishment. So, say for example, if you were to murder somebody, say 700 years ago, you'd be executed in front of everybody. But now, now it's a very soft form of punishment. But if you hold dissident ideas, because a dissident idea is far more existentially threatening to the powers that be than, say, just somebody goes out there and kills somebody. Like, just think of London.
There's a lot more people in the world now.
Right. Well, there's that, and it's just the ability of information and news to travel. Like, it moves in an instant. Whereas back then, you hear of a dissident idea. If you live in sort of a remote region of the country, the chances are you're not going to hear about it for a long time. I think, okay, an example of this is the Jacobite movement persisted until 1745, when the English Civil War was 100 years before that, and that persisted in the Highlands of Scotland. Of course, back then information wasn't able to travel as quickly, but nevertheless, the movement still prevailed for several generations after its inception, and something like that today would not happen to that big of a degree. So, I think that we also need to understand the importance of power, and I think this kind of is interrelated with memes in changing consciousness. I saw a take that the other day where somebody said the internet overstates its importance in the 2016 political results, and to a degree, yes, that they kind of do. I think a lot of people were already pissed off, and there was a sort of a sea change in people's lens when it came to looking at establishment politics. But at the same time, a lot of hearts and minds were captivated by memes in 2015 and 2016, because a lot of young people who didn't believe in the Hollywood message anymore went to the internet and became red pills. And I think their views have evolved over the past 4 or 5 years, but at the same time, there's no sort of symbol of a cogent right-wing movement at this stage in America, at least. And the only sort of mainstream symbol of that is still Trump, even though he has sort of faltered on a few key issues.
Yeah, for me, I think the thing with the 20 what was it? The 2016 a lot of thing for Twitter is that, like, I agree with you, like sometimes like Twitter, so like as you mentioned, like Twitter sometimes thinks we overstated like kind of what our results were for to inform in 2016. But I subscribe to that. Someone made a pretty good point. This guy named Michael Tracy. He's like a lot of people say Twitter isn't real life because, for Ilhan Omar suggested that Israel had some sort of big, disproportionate influence on our government, which is true. But when she mentioned that, suddenly there's like all these bills, all these like the major people from power come out like, oh, we can't. So a single tweet, kind of rocked the news cycle and kind of made these major bills have to be passed, and the major leaders of the Democratic Congress had to come out and they have to like, oh no, we condemn all forms of hatred against, unless like white people and Christians, then that's fine, but everyone else we can't do. But so it's I that I'm like, wow, that's actually I think. And also whenever I encounter people on the left, they always now they kind of understand like all these, like when they talk about the alt right, they don't really know what that is, but they just, oh, it's just the new far right or whatever. They just kind of label them all like alt right, and they've kind of been seeping into the cultural consciousness. I think that's what kind of memes are supposed to be. They're supposed to like spread. So in a way, it's kind of like people under, and I've never. I mean, maybe I'm just young, but I don't think I've ever seen people start talking about seriously, even if in just in a mock like ethnic homelands or ethnic identitarianism. Like no one ever talked about that, at least as far as I was on it, as far as I know. So
Well, that's because it used to be a given. I mean, a lot of the politics we want to get back to were just a
well,
given
yeah.
75 years ago.
But yeah, like again, but like I meant like within the last 75, like during when things started to become taboo after World War II, right? When things started, you can't talk about racial differences or you can't talk about this. It's as you say, yeah. And if, at the end of the day, this isn't something new. It's going back to the how things were, and how it's just that it's been suppressed for such a long time that now that for a generation that's been growing up in this culture, we've never really taken as a given. Everyone's kind of been brainwashed to get it out of their system, but it's just now that we talk about it, it's like, oh, this is a new thing. So it's like it used to be something that was just a given. Then it was trying to be suppressed, and then it was suppressed for decades, and now has a reemergence in a new generation.
Yeah,
Definitely.
yeah. I get what you're saying, and I think to a point, it's a lot of it is a case of our received history, as we were talking about earlier, because our received history, my parents were a little older, so I thankfully received a bit of their history, so sort of more of a pre-clown world history. But people whose parents were born in the 70s and 80s, or beyond the civil rights era, this is going to be their reality, and they're going to impart their views and their morality upon you according to what it was post civil rights era, in the postmodern era. And as a result, well, if you have any kids after being handed down those values, well, you're going to probably hand those values with a few embellishments of your uh, contemporary society onto your own children. So I was kind of lucky to have missed that out, to not be invested or imbued in these crazy clown world values that we see today.
Yeah, my father was actually a bit older. He was born in the 1950s, so he's really traditional in his own kind of way. My mother was born in the 1970s though, but she was born in the Kyrgyz Soviet Socialist Republic. So she was raised in communism, but she's Russian though, but what was it? She kind of has her own kind of view on it, because I don't think the Soviets had that kind of global home. It was authoritarian, just, but it wasn't like the kind of, I think so. My mom kind of escaped it as well, so I guess I'm also kind of, I guess, lucky in a way that I kind of escaped kind of the parents kind of not having a sort of strict, because in a way my mom and dad divorced as well, and this is and my mom was very kind of, and I spent most of my last few years, my teen years, with my mom,
Mm-hmm.
and she was just very open, very liberal on like her. She wasn't really strict on anything, and obviously as a teenager, as a rebellious teenager, that sounded awesome. But as I figured out in Marine Corps boot camp, that's not how the world works. You have to impose duties upon yourself. You have to impose, limits on yourself. You can't just live however the hell you want, because that, at the end of the day, as you said, if you actually, in a way, if you impose limits on yourself, if you impose duties upon yourself, and you wait a little bit longer instead of just self-indulging and just living however the hell you want, you actually become much better off in the future than if you just did whatever you want.
Yeah, right. And it's very interesting that you bring up the case of the Soviet Union, because what I have seen is a return to Christian Orthodox in Russia after the Soviet Union. So you got three generations worth of anti-theism, and that's a living memory's worth of anti-theism, and people are returning to their roots and traditions. But what I will say is, despite Stalin, ethnically rearranging some Soviets in order to instill conformity, like what Mao did with Tibet by mass importing loads of Han Chinese into Tibet to instill conformity. And this is a tactic China's used throughout their history to invade other provinces, is by just mass immigration. Mass immigration is a tactic by which you can
of war.
Oh, it's a tactic of war. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's a tactic of war. So Stalin did it in the middle of the 20th century in order to gain conformity. So difference is that this was kind of like an alt-right talking point in 2016, when a lot of people on the right were still for liberal capitalism, which a lot of people seem to have abandoned since then. Is the fact that sort of communism froze everything in Eastern Europe, so which made it easier to return to these traditions, whereas the neoliberal Western European and Northern European countries had a lot of mass immigration from other places and adopted all these sort of crazy post-civil rights, globo homo social traditions to, in an effort to appear tolerant or whatever. And it's just completely reorganized the social structure of everything. And Eastern European countries are the ones who are rejecting both communism and neoliberalism, which, it's just two parts of the same materialist coin. And this is, if you're linking this to time preferences, you need to sort of step outside of a materialist realm to give yourself a purpose in something beyond oneself, in order to live for the future rather than just for immediate gratification.
Yeah, another thing I actually meant. Also, another thing is that since they lost their culture, since they lost their culture, and I get through first the Nazis and then the communists, they were able to since they were able to lose it, they were able to what was it? They have a sense of better identity about themselves. But since we didn't lose our sense of identity, we just kind of, I guess, this is something Endeavor kind of touched on, is that we've become decadent in our greatness. We've become weak. And a sort of a philosophical idea I have is only through hell will we find heaven. Essentially, you will the only way, because if every day is a good day, then it's just a normal day. However, if every day you work hard, suffer, and you lose something, because I think we've all, just a bit of a worldly example. If, say, you have something, and then let's say you have your phone, you always use your phone, then suddenly after a few weeks, so your phone just isn't, you just turn it on, you have it there. But let's say one day your phone just breaks and you have to wait a few weeks to get a new phone. Suddenly, your whole world crashes down. You're like, wow, I didn't realize how much I lost. I know that's a materialistic idea. I'm just trying to connect it to something that people might experience in their daily lives. But it's just, no one knows what they have until they lose it, and we don't realize how great we have as Western civilization until we lose it. And that's why I think Eastern Europeans have a bit of a better sense of identity about themselves, because they've lost it, and they were invaded, and then they were and that's for example, Poland. They were invaded by the Nazis, and then they were occupied by the Soviets, and then they just recently, in the last 20, 30 years, they finally got their independence. So they understand the civilizational struggle, and we haven't. So I think it's just empires rise and fall. We have to, maybe it's just inevitable. Maybe we do have to just wait. We can't change it. We have to wait until inevitably our civilization crashes, and then the strong rise from that, and then they grow from this hardship, and they build a country again that's sane, and then they create, through that strength and through that wisdom, a better society, and then they pass it on to their children. And maybe it's just a vicious cycle. Maybe I'm just being nihilistic about that. Maybe it is possible to have an enduring civilization, but I'm not sure. But another thing is also what you were mentioning before is about mass immigration being a form of warfare. I mean, it's true. For example, if I remember correctly, the Nazis were prosecuted for mass importing Germans into Polish territory. They were I think they were prosecuted for that. And another thing, in a weird way, is now this is something my parents debate a little bit. My mom says it was voluntary. My dad has a theory that my mom was forcibly moved. But my grandma was born in Ukraine, But when she was young, she was moved along with her parents to Kyrgyzstan or in Central Asia, and it was like a way to like kind of inform conformity. I guess, as you said, I think Stalin wanted a sort of kind of like a population that was like faithful or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and in a way, it was kind of like, and I think a lot of people like realized that's like another thing that the Soviets did that was wrong is mass importing people into, just because Russia. For example, my mom was born in Kyrgyzstan. However, she's not Kyrgyz, and I don't think anyone would think that. But in clown world, apparently she's Kyrgyz, even though she's
Yeah.
ethnically Russian. It's kind of like if you were say born in Japan and like you have a British accent, you're white, and then like they're like, oh yeah, that guy's Japanese. Like everyone would be like, what? That's stupid. No, he's British. So it's a lot of people just kind of we kind of do the world.
Well, yeah, and just to kind of underscore your point, like if Western countries were poor, destitute, and backwards, then nobody apart from those native to those countries would want to identify as them. And just on another point, I mean, think of Jared Taylor. You know who Jared Taylor is, right?
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, he was born and raised in Japan, but is he Japanese?
Yeah.
Is he Japanese? No, of course he isn't.
Yeah, of course not. It'd be absurd to suggest. I mean, he might be Japanese on paper, but and no one believes that. But apparently, another thing that's really absurd is one thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier is with Turkey. When Erdogan was trying to vote for constitutional changes that would give him more power, he was trying to campaign in Europe where there's a huge Turkish diaspora,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of European countries denied him being able to campaign there. And then he suddenly is like, well, he like went off the edges. He called them all Nazis, and then he's like, well, the future of Europe is for the Turks because the Turks are having 4 to 5 children and they will replace you. So suddenly this like NATO ally, this guy who, the Turkey, someone who wants to be into the European Union, suddenly this guy just suddenly talks about, yeah, we're going to like replace all you with Turks. It doesn't matter. We're going to have a conformist population. So, they're playing the long game. They're importing a bunch of Turks into all Europe because they know. And then suddenly now demographics is destiny. Now there's a Muslim immigrant party called Denk in the Dutch parliament, who basically campaigned for the rights of basically non-Dutchmen and non-Christian Dutchmen to just kind of enforce their kind of they're like for multiculturalism reform, or like, oh, the state should like instead of promoting Dutch culture, they should promote all cultures, and they should do that. And it's just very so yeah, I mean, you have to like a lot of people don't realize that they're playing the long game. They're like, because if you actually get like this radical like identitarian activist, a lot of white liberals might be just kind of blind to it. But if you talk to like an actual like black identitarian, like someone who's like a Black Lives Matter guy or person or whatever, if you talk to like these people like this Latina, like a woke Latina chick or whatever, they're like, yeah, well, white people are becoming a minority. We're going to become in power, and then then that's when we could actually do what we want.
Yeah, it's like a very gay way of invading you by sort of softly promoting you to stop having kids so you can move into your neighborhood. It's like they kind of realize, I'm just going to go out and say it, they realize they're up against a better competitor, a better rival, which is why they have to deplete their numbers in order to win. And you kind of start seeing this trend in the Southwest and Southern states of America where Mexicans are starting to move in record numbers, and they're sort of de facto reclaiming these states as part of their own territory, even though it isn't incorporated as part of Mexico, because they're going to want to maybe remain within the U.S. for the welfare or the gifts,
Yeah.
or the wonderful social programs that didn't stop them from leaving their home country anyway. But what was really quite it wasn't surprising, but it was striking, was that boxer, the fat boxer who's been memed everywhere. He's originally from Mexico, but he was born and raised in California, and he was flying a Mexican flag. So imagine if I moved, I myself being half British, if I moved to, so if I was born in France and I was waving a British flag, does that tell you that I fully integrated into French society? No. I mean, integration would imply sort of a renunciation of one's former heritage before moving into that other place. And of course, we know that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
As you were saying earlier about a lot of people coming from the Middle East and Southern Asia moving to Britain, when they adopt the kind of the N-word culture and the sort of social liberalism of Britain, some people, it just sends them batty. They live it for a bit and they can't handle it. So they go back to their former religious traditions, but they go back to it in a far harder way. Like you see all these so-called hate preachers in the UK. A lot of them sort of live this life of Western excess before going back to becoming a hate preacher, or so-called. So, you know, I don't think this cocktail of nihilism, secularism, and Western social liberalism helps people coming from these groups. Granted, a lot of people who do come, who thrive in these areas, are people who don't have, say, more traditional sexual orientations. But on the other hand, I think a lot of them just remain within their own group because there's no incentive structure for people to integrate. I mean, there's nothing saying, well, you either learn our language or you get the fuck out. You either live among British people in Britain or you get the fuck out. There's nothing saying that. They can mobilize each other, they can form groups, they can form political parties, in the case of the Netherlands, and nobody's telling them that they can't. And this is the catch-22. This is the self-abolition of liberal democracy. It's the fact that it cannot preserve itself when confronted with a greater, stronger ideology, which is underpinned by diviners in the case of Islam, or is underpinned by sort of a more blood and soil oriented underpinning. In the case of, say, Mexicans in America, liberal democracy cannot defend itself to that. Liberal democracy is a body without an immune system. The only way it can work is if every part of that political corpus aspires to follow these liberal principles. The second people want to bandy together as a group or go off and form a counter movement, it's fucked. It has nothing, it has no immune system. Unless it is the people looking to preserve that liberal democracy in the future, because that would constitute intolerance. So the evil right wingers who come together to try to preserve Western society pose as a threat to the counter movement to liberalism are the ones who need to be attacked. So it's like you have an autoimmune disease that attacks the white blood cells.
Yeah. I think the one thing I agree with you. It's as you can it's very easy for liberal democracy to be subverted. The one thing I'd say is that what they try to do, I mean, even in liberal democracy, like even in because America was founded on, like, I guess even in a, we understand it's not a the fully egalitarian way of life, but they kind of were founded on a lot of Enlightenment ideals. And the way they, but even then, it's like we're fighting for when when we go to Iraq, like we're gonna fight for America. It's like that's an intrinsically nationalistic calling. Like we're fighting for a nation, it's or freedom, or like they kind of put some words like kind of like freedom, or we're fighting for this, we're fighting for liberation. They're trying to put its own like narrative. The thing is that these tools that they say they're fighting for, like freedom, can be used to like get it subverted by other hostile forces. So like Islam will take care of freedom of religion and use freedom of religion to push, because the idea of Islam is submission. That's the point of it. Submit the non-Muslims. And as we understand, Islam's a more violent religion. So it's either you submit or some or you get blown up. But so and then they'll just use it to push their religion, and they'll use the freedom and abuse it. So unless you limit freedom, unless you limit the liberalism, and then try to like put restrictions on it, and try to make it, I guess, try to hybrid it with other ideologies. But in a pure liberal democracy, it always will always get subverted by other people. So yeah, that's what I agree with you though, for the most part.
Yeah, yeah, and the way it's going, it's not going to end
Mhm.
pleasantly. It's definitely not going to end pleasantly. I don't really want to be on the accelerationist bandwagon, but At the same time, as we were trying to state at the beginning, you have a multiplicity of different people, different cultures, different ethnic groups, different religions, and then you have a multiplicity of narratives, sub-narratives, meta-narratives, and everyone has the ability to tune in to an unfettered source of information. So there are so, like, societies become so ultra subjective that something is going to have to dominate and sort of bring order to the chaos that we're living in, because I cannot see it becoming much more chaotic without there being a very hard reaction to this chaos. And there is a reaction on the left and on the right to liberalism, and well, to neoliberalism in particular, because that is the dominant regime. However, neither side has sufficient financial backing to do much about it at present. But
Yeah.
then again, there is going to be a sufficient groundswell to counteract all the problems that neoliberalism has put us in. And just finally, before you get your point in, I think among the neoliberal intelligentsia, there's just such a amount of arrogance and hubris that they think that they've crafted an ideology to end all other ideologies. This is going to be the end of history. We're just going to have liberal democracy ad infinitum. We're going to have free markets, debt-based economies on a parabolic scale of 3% growth. Of course, resources are finite, and third world populations are exploding on a more personal level, and then on a local level. Sorry, that on an international level. On a local level, you have all this nihilism and all this unhappiness, and people are going to start getting very pissed off with what they're told when it doesn't match up to the lived experiences.
Yeah, and I think what we have to understand as people on the dissident right is that we have to this is again talking about your the time preferences. We have to look forward, hundreds of something that will last beyond. Will we live long if we fight? Will we live long enough to transform Europe into a strong moral European where we cast off all the not Muslims and everything, we actually transform into the societies we wanted, right? I mean, maybe it won't happen in our lifetimes. But we have to deal with that. We have to understand that we're doing this for our children and our children's children. Like, we have to understand that we're fighting for a better cause in the future. We have to understand this is going to take decades, maybe even a century. I think the big nihilism is that, well, Trump didn't do anything that, because the thing is that we were at a point, and then things could dramatically happen, and maybe it doesn't have to be the case where it's just a cycle where things just go up and down, where the strong create good societies, and then the good societies create weak men, and then the weak men make the downfall of society. Maybe that we could break that chain. Maybe there can be a place where if we just look forward and just continuously we understand what we're fighting for, and we kind of apply that long-term goal thinking, we could actually create we understand that, like, this is going to take time, and it's going to be a while, and we just have to keep fighting and keep, and maybe it's through memes, through subversions, through infiltrating kind of the higher offices, higher ups of government, and trying to implement our people and push ideas, push the boundaries of ideas, push the Overton window, and just it's going to take a while, and maybe there is a silver, maybe there is a way we could get out of this and actually escape the inevitable collapse, maybe not, but
well, Nietzsche pointed out that to change consciousness, change public consciousness, it takes a long time. And I kind of agree with him. Because even though you have this sustained propagandizing since the civil rights era, a lot of people aren't okay with a lot of issues, even though it's been 2 generations now, if not more than 2 generations. And the other thing is, I do believe that there is a cyclical theory of history, as you pointed out with the meme, the sort of the strong men create good times create weak men create bad times, and so on and so forth. But it's not a reason to kind of fall into a deterministic trap or to become nihilistic about the future. By understanding that wealth, luxury, and sort of social tolerance lays the groundwork for societal collapse, you can do something about that. But of course, it means having to overhaul institutional power. It means having to educate people. And, well, the way to do that would be to reclaim the institutions. But one of the big problems with the right is that ontologically speaking, as who they are, it's not part of the right to want to accept these positions of power because they're off, usually producing for a family rather than working and teaching, elementary school kids. That's more of a role for an unmarried woman before they find a husband. And when they do marry, and they probably don't reform their thinking as much because it's publicly run, and people in the public sector tend to be more lefty. But at the same time, if you want to try to do something good and really change society and go back to where you are, you need to sort of question the ontology of the right. You need to question who is the right. You need to talk about what their strengths are and play to them. Of course, more and more people are going to shift towards the right as society becomes battier and the clown world just accelerates. But at the same time, you need to think of how you can implement your strengths to the best of your advantage, which is one of the big problems the right has, because we're completely disenfranchised and we have no institutional power at all.
Yeah, we have to yeah, it's gonna be a bit of a while for us to because the thing well, we have to, I think there was a study done that when white people are shown that like stories about their displacement, they become naturally more conservative. They just suddenly become more, even if they like don't care about race, they suddenly, because it's a lot of people say they don't care about race, and I think a lot of the strong left understand that. They understand that, oh, implicit bias and everything. Now, as they say that's a bad thing, we say that's a good thing. They understand that people aren't colorblind. Like no one is. People will always want to be around people like themselves. Either and the more if people speak similar, they act similar, they look similar, it's more comfortable, and that's why, as we mentioned, it's more better for a functioning society. As that, it's very hard. I mean, what type of retard thought of the idea of like, oh, diversity is our strength? That literally means the more different we are, the more united we are. That's like an Orwellian type of thing. It's like war is peace. It's a fundamentally misconcept. You can't be united in your differences. Like we're united based on we're united because of our similarities. So it's a very weird it's a very weird thing.
Yeah, it's literally in the name. I mean, diversity does imply division, and the fact that you can have all these people from radically divergent backgrounds coming together and living harmoniously without any problems erupting, well, that's just delusional.
Yeah,
that's completely delusional.
And then not only that, they say they want diversity, and then on the other breath, what their policies inevitably will create is a singular mongrelized room temperature IQ slave race, and then there's like this and then there's like this billionaire class that just like runs the entire world, and then they profit off this, like they have no culture, no identity, and they're just like consuming every day and just become these like slave people, and like you just live in a rat society. And so it's, I mean, like where's the diversity in that? That just seems like a nightmare dystopia. They're like, I don't know. I think, in my opinion, I think in a weird way, in a paradoxical way, our right wing nationalism is like international ideology. We want Japan to remain Japanese and filled with we want Somalia to be Somalian or whatever. It's everyone, or we want Turkey to remain Turkish, or we want Sweden to remain Swedish. It's for everyone. It's an international ideology it's like it's an understanding that people around the world have a right to be from the mass human slave, the mass human, body count, it's kind of like, if you love everything, you don't love anything. Or if you think everything, because the way things are unique is because they're different from other things. And I think that's what we should strive for, is that out of all of the world, and of all the people in the world, there's a unique group of people that should remain and be self-determination. And that applies for everyone. That's a Japanese person could realize that for their kind, and the Chinese can, and the Turks can, and everyone, the Dutch can, so it's for everyone. And it's something that I think, in a weird way, unites everyone. I don't think the left wing has, I don't know what unites. I don't know. I think that what they're trying to go for is just, this welfare state, and then this like this diverse. I think the true, I like the policy of like the province, or how, I don't know, the proverb, like good fences make good neighbors. I think that if we want to actually live, if you want in a world where there's tons of different ethnic groups and different cultures, the best way we live together is with different nations. And as long as we all have a common understanding that, we all have a right to that. So, obviously wars of aggression are off the table, but,
Yeah, so I mean, in regards to the future, I think we've been toying with this idea that eventually consciousness is going to change and it's going to be very hostile towards those who are of the establishment. But at the same time, in my book, I do explain about how, you know, in my chapter on metapolitics, that
what?
low time, my chapter on metapolitics in my book. Can you hear me?
I hear you now. Yeah, I cut it off for just like seconds.
Okay, my internet's been giving me trouble
Your
recently.
in your book about
So, let me just click out of that. Okay, so on my chapter on metapolitics, I talk about how low time preferences is linked to being on the right, but
Mhm.
it's also linked to high intelligence, and highly intelligent people tend to be on the left. But it fits because a lot of people on the left are for these globalist experiments because it means that it cements status and their income and their position of power over everyone else, which is why it benefits them to be on the left, especially if they're closer to the upper echelons of power. Um, and of course, this is their narrative. They've been encased in a sort of a liberal political bubble all of their lives, and they don't know anything else. So they're just using to what they have in their epistemology to the best of their ability in order to cement that position of power and to have low time preferences within their own moral framework.
Yeah, I think it's their for their yeah, I think I've talked to a lot of left wing people, and I was on the left as well, so I kind of understand where they're coming from. And this is why I also have these like discussions. I hate to be like I pull a Dave Rubin and the like this big galaxy brain, battle of ideas, but I do like to, maybe I am wrong. Maybe the left has. I mean, but it's just a matter of just seeing what they, and I think they. I don't really put like a lot of. I don't think they're malevolent. I think they legitimately believe. Like 99% of people are pushing what they think is the good thing, but as they say, that the world, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I I don't think they're like let's destroy the family, but it's like at the end they're like either they're just indifferent to it, or they're just they don't understand that the policies they're pushing is leading to the destruction of the family, or just as an example, there's just so many other things that are going wrong. So I think I subscribe more toward like their. It's just a matter of like maybe they're because I think they want the best in the world. I've talked to a lot of people on the left. I think they just kind of think, oh, if we're just fighting racism, we're just fighting to help everyone be equal and every. Again, it's just as we mentioned, it's just they kind of have the wrong mindset. We have to kind of change their framework, and then once we change their framework, that's when we can act. Because you can't talk to someone on the progressive left and make them a person on the alt right overnight. You have to slowly chip away at their worldview. You can't just they can't change it automatically because they have a whole different framework, and it takes time for you to change. So that's why we have to
Yeah.
think forward.
Well, and also evidence supports that if you provide them with information that acutely goes against their worldview, they'll just double down on their pre-existing worldview anyway. So it's kind of redundant to do that. And you have to, as you say, chip away at their worldview. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we have the time on our side in order to do so.
Yeah, I also one thing I kind of tried to it's the same thing I did with when I tried to talk to Polydice. He's as I said, he's a left wing social democrat, but I was talking to him about immigration in the frame of workers' rights, in the
Hmm.
way that immigrants lower wages, and that corporate hey, isn't it a coincidence that big business wants lots of cheap labor? It's and he seemed like it's kind of like he's kind of seeing it through the immigrant's point. Oh, it's just the poor downtrodden immigrant. So you have to kind of make if you see it through like a worker's lens, they sound like, oh, that's suddenly immigration. You stop seeing immigrants. I think immigration from the sense of, oh, the poor downtrodden, poor brown person from Guatemala, toward, oh, it's I'm trying to fight for the worker in Ohio from being having his wages depressed. So then suddenly they might support less immigration. So you have to kind of put it from their worldview type.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I've heard some more classical leftists talk about how they're against this mass immigration because they realize that they're not going to be the so-called proletariat in order to be sort of co-opted to throw a revolution, but they're just going to become an extra part of the serf population for the neoliberal establishment. And this is the culture they're becoming introduced to, the sort of the worst elements of secular neoliberalism, in order just to become another consumer slash producer and just to become another cog in the GDP machine. So I think a lot of people like Zizek realize this, and another person who I saw was talking against um, the displacement of the white working class was Jason Uru. I can't pronounce his name properly, but he's a self-avowed Maoist, and I think they recognize that if you begin to disenfranchise the white working class, the reaction you're going to expect is going to be worse than something that ever happened in the 20s or 30s, because they're going to realize that the narrative that they've been fed for the last 3 generations has been completely fraudulent, and their whole lives have been in essence a lie, and they've been forced to accept mass immigration into the deindustrialized neighborhoods where there's little opportunity. People are miserable. There's a lot of alcoholism, a lot of SSRI use, a lot of opioid use, and they're just going to be even more pissed off than what happened back then in the future if you carry on doing this. And if you want to have this kind of revolution, there's going to have to be a change in consciousness, which they have been doing. People have warmed up to more liberal ideas, but at the same time, if they do it too rapidly by completely rearranging the demographic makeup of the neighborhoods, then people are just going to get pissed off, and it's going to be worse. And you're just going to jeopardize any chance that you have in having a revolution. It's just going to go completely in another direction.
Yeah, I think they're like, well, I think they first of all think that like, oh, that's just racism on their. I sometimes it's not even like, that's I guess this we're instead of trying, I like you're trying to be like optimistic and all that, and not let me try to. I'm sorry to put a bit of a damper on it, but sometimes I think like whenever they get shown like, hey, look, if this is gonna, you can't have a unified workers coalition of people of different groups of people who have different sources, because it's not just economics. That's I think the fatal flaw of I guess this class consciousness. It's also there's also a cultural social factor to it. It's all the same thing with I'll get back to that in a later point, but like let me just stick on point. But it's I think they're like, well, the only reason why they're that is because they have racist thinking, and they just can't, we have to deconstruct racism in their minds and all that. So it's kind of they don't like, oh, they come, I don't a lot sometimes they don't even come to the realization that, oh, what I'm doing is we need to try to do this in a more better way. It's like, oh yeah, well, no, this is just you being an evil bigot. So and one thing I realized, one thing that they can't separate, as I mentioned just a minute ago, was the fact of culture and economics. Like a lot of people, the right wing, at least in America, a lot of the mainstream conservatives, they always fight about culture, and it's not even like, it's like very basic concern. It's not even like right now. I remember in the National Review, which is like a major right wing like newspaper or website, I
Mm-hmm.
think, and they're like the conservative case for transgender bathrooms or whatever, and
Oh
it's just
gosh.
I know, and it's like they're just, as I said, if you fight in the liberal framework, you always, because the way I describe it is that the progressives take a step forward, conservatives just stay in the same place. So conservatives, that as we said, we're so no matter what, all the conservatives do is just delay the inevitable. Now what we need to do is be taking a step back, but that's why I think the right wing in America needs to change. So it's and so, but we have to understand is like it's not just the sort of, how do you say it, it's not just culture, because again, now even if you're just culture, you have to understand there's economic woes, there's trade deals that you have to account for, there's other things. But the left wing has to understand also is that it's not just economics. They're like, oh, a secular talk, which is a major progressive social democrat person, he always like, well, he's actually really good, but he's like, well, I divide Trump supporters to those who supported him because of trade deals and just overlooked his bigotry, and the people who just voted for him because of his bigotry. Now, obviously, bigotry means you have some sort of like, obviously, we know bigotry or racism. We know that's like a fraudulent term, but like, it's let me just roll with me for a second. But he doesn't understand. Like, yes, people voted for Trump because he said he wanted to rebuild the infrastructure, because he wanted to rewrite the trade deals. But they also voted for him because of his immigration and because of his they like at this. Yes, they don't want to become a deindustrialized wasteland of where the government just leaves them out to dry. But they also don't want to become like a Brazil type thing where it's just a mixed mass of ethnicities and cultures where there's no and so it's a bit of a it's both things. So people have to understand that.
Yeah, yeah. I think you need to kind of strike a balance between the two in order to get to somewhere more cohesive. But at the same time, I I think you need to try to remain optimistic about the future. If we're all sort of collectively black-pilled, I don't think that's going to be able to do much. Um, Being able to get around the vast wealth and influence and power of the current plutocrats, the money power involved, is going to thing. Well, I think almost a miracle, but you can do a lot to change consciousness. You can do a lot to change people's opinion and eat away at the consciousness of the people who are already decidedly on the left. Um, and I think a lot of evidence is doing that. For example, I've I've seen less and less people sort of talking out about how racist it is for people to bring up crime stats of immigrants. I think we've more moved away from the human biodiversity aspect of things and sort of moved into this realm where we start talking about narratives and truth and just the general change of people of the consensus. In the meantime, now I think we're at the calm before the storm of the up and coming 2020 election. I will be writing another book to hopefully have out by Christmas. So, we have a situation where hopefully 2020 is going to be fun, because even though we have a higher calling, you don't want to make it boring. You don't
Yeah,
want to be suffering. You got to have an element of fun into it, which was what made 2015, 2016 so special.
yeah, and that's why they want to clamp down on, like, to be sure, like this, like the big populist movement in the internet that happened in 2015, 2016 is trying to crush out. That's why you see this mass censorship and all that. And yeah, you're absolutely correct on that. We need to what was it? What do you think is the do you think I guess as we're on the 2020 thing, do you think what do you think Trump is going to win? And do you and if he is, what do you think is the strategy that he needs to uh like, what do you think is the strategy to get Donald Trump? I don't like, first of all, I think we should also talk, like, should Trump, because the thing with Trump is that I don't know if he even, I guess, earned, I guess, and in a weird way, I've kind of come to realize this is sometimes I think it would have actually been better if Hillary got elected. Now I know that sounds bad, but I kind of, and maybe that does sound accelerationist, but I think the more you kind of clamp down on people, the more they're more. It's kind of idle, as we mentioned before. It's the when you're a victim of your own success. As we said, the Western civilization is crashing out because of its success. And but the same thing with, if the liberals won with Obama and then they won with Hillary, they become complacent, right? Now, my fear, and I think this is going to happen, is that with Trump got elected, the right wing becomes kind of complacent. They just go, like, oh, he'll just, and then the left wing gets very energized to try to get back into power. So,
Hmm.
that I kind of think there might be a bit of and also depends on who they elect for the Democratic nomination, which we could talk about as well. So, what do you think?
I don't really have any election predictions yet. We're going to have to see what happens after the primaries before I can make a more of a cogent opinion on this. But at the same time, I think Trump has alienated a lot of his base. There has been a lot of a demographic rearranging in some of the key states, such as Michigan. I'm hearing he's not going to win because he only won that marginally. And if industry and if the economic situation doesn't improve in a lot of these Rust Belt states, then he's not going to win re-election. Of course, he is going to have his mainstays in flyover country, and the
Yeah,
left coast is always going to vote for the Democrats, and
yeah, because
so is New England. But
yeah,
go
because
ahead.
yeah, he only won, if I remember, by like 70,000 votes, and the way in like all in the Rust Belt states, because the thing is, Romney won, like Kansas and Wyoming and all that, but that what he needs to win is, like Florida, and the reason why he won by the margin he did was by flipping states that haven't gone Republican in like 40 years, and so he but if he, as I said, that's why, if his base can't rile, like, if he just doesn't do it, there's a good quote from this guy. I forgot what he said, but he's like, either the Republican Party puts an end to mass immigration and mass deplatforming, or it will get rid of the Republican Party.
Yeah, that's
So,
true. That's
and I
absolutely
mean,
true.
I'm not a big fan of the Republican Party. I consider myself an independent because I think the Republican Party is just dumb and retarded. Um, I think we those are the two things. And if Trump just, I mean, hasn't really done. I mean, he's passed some like symbolic things. I mean, something. But the thing is, the most I mean, I think the reason why I still support him in even marginally is because I understand. I think at his heart of hearts, he does believe what he believes. Like, I think he understands he wants to limit immigration, at least to to him. It's like, oh, I want high skilled immigrants, but it's like, as long as we like restrict. I mean, even having, I guess, he understands we need less. He wants to combat illegal immigration and less immigration in general. He might not want like so much as us, but it's something. He might want less wars, and in his heart of hearts, even. But I think it's just. I think so. I think I still believe in him, that he believes in his stuff. I think. I mean, obviously, I could change in my opinion, but I think it's just since he hasn't pursued anything of worth. He's passed a free speech executive order, but it's like, I mean, it has like no teeth. He's passed a bunch of clauses like, oh, do this like about, but he hasn't passed any major reforms to our immigration system at all. He's, nothing has done, and since he hasn't done anything, he might be doomed to. I don't know if I think in 2020, because he's the just the way traditional presidential dynamics work. Since he's the incumbent and the traditional economy is doing all right, and if the Democrats elect someone who isn't kind of equally populist, who might take Trump's base away, like
Hmm.
say a Bernie Sanders or something, um, he will, I think he might still win, but I think, what's going to happen maybe in the 2020s is that Texas might turn blue, and then suddenly, no matter how many Rust Belts they take, they're going to, you know, and then especially when if they abandon, I guess I guess they call it Trumpism, but I don't really like it to call it that, but it's just a mixture of nationalist like economics and nationalist nationalist social policies, so it's if they just abandon and become a free market Romney Ryan type of people, they're going to lose. And they're going to lose the Rust Belt. They're going to lose
Yeah.
South to the demographic change, and then they'll become irrelevant.
Well, that's the problem with sort of boomer conservatism. It's so myopic, it's so limited, and it's very idealistic. It's sort of returning back to sort of Reagan and Thatcher's era, which wasn't really everything that they believe it to be. I mean, in the case of Reagan, he increased the federal government enormously in that time. He increased the national debt. He gave amnesty to 3 million illegals in California. He put through the machine gun ban. I don't know what it's called, but where he banned machine guns. So a lot of bad things, very anti-conservative things, and a lot of the softening, social softening towards certain social practices happened within their time in power. So I think boomers have this image of these sort of right wing heroes, which really wasn't, and they want to. A lot of the time, a lot of the Rhino and Republican base wants to bring that back, and nobody wants that. Nobody, like young people, don't want that. Sort of the Charlie Kirkism, sort of really strong foreign policy for in the Middle East, and then these so-called free markets, which aren't really free markets. It's just deregulation and tax cuts for large corporations, while not actually doing anything to improve the country. It looks good on paper because the GDP is increasing, but at the same time, they're very wishy-washy and weak on immigration. And of course, you can't have this constant immigration forever, otherwise you'll change the country. And they don't seem to understand demographic voting statistics. Anyway, man, should we look to wrapping up? I think we're
Yeah,
going like a
yeah,
little over
yeah,
two
sure.
hours.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
getting a
no,
bit
sure.
burnt out.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, I'm so where should we? What should be an ending? What should we end it on, or how should we kind of wind it down?
Oh, I don't know.
We kind of talked about everything. What should we? I mean, I'm. How do we like lower it? I guess what's the future of God? What? How should we end it? God, I'm stuck. I guess should we talk about the? Can you shoot some ideas what you want to like end it on?
Well, I mean, what kind of? I don't know if you could be more future oriented, but yeah, I think we're in a very tricky spot because even if you do get Trump and Brexit, it goes to show that the establishment will just go and co-opt these movements or to stall them, like in the case of Brexit and Trump not delivering on his key points. I mean, he's given all the neoliberal stuff. Um, the tax cuts, which hasn't really benefited anyone apart from big business, but immigration has increased under Trump,
Yeah.
which is completely antithetical to what he's promised. And you're in a situation where almost 10% of your population is illegal. That's unsustainable. And it all he's done is radicalize the left. You've seen these graphs where the left has actually just shifted so far to the left in the last 3 years
Mhm.
because they believe they have the Trump that the media paints him out to be, and the Trump the media paints him out to be is the one that the right wants.
Yeah.
Of course, nobody gets what they want; they just get a representation of what they want.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think that more of these populist movements will gain traction in Europe. I think it's inevitable. I think people are starting to wake up to what's going on, and I think a lot of people, since they're online now, which is why the powers that be need to censor the internet, is because they realize that with the flow of information, there's a flow of information which is contrary to their position of power, which is why they have to get everyone off the internet who speaks out against the establishment logos.
Yeah, and as I said, we have to what we have to understand is that we're in here for the long term. We have to dig in our heels, and we have to understand, hey, look, this whole cultural, greatness and goals, they don't just come overnight. And they if we're expecting, oh, if we just re-elect Trump in 2020, things will go better, it won't.
When
And things aren't like I think we kind of naively thought we'll put Trump in power in 2016 because it was this big. People finally figured out things that they haven't been, that are taboo. They weren't allowed to say, and they finally had an expression, and they have this new worldview. The challenge right now is forming that worldview into a coherent worldview, something that we could push into the general public and to push the Overton window.
mm,
And it's going to take a long time. It's going to I mean, I'm young. I think a lot of people on the alt-right is young. I mean, we're all, you're in your 20s. I'm only 18. I'm 19 soon. But we're all gonna, we're young. And so maybe we will see the fruits of our labor. But we have to understand that it will take decades. It will take a long time. And we will have to keep on fighting because as long as we keep stick to we keep true to what we believe in, which is we believe in a world where in our future, where in the year 2200, Europe looks European, where Germany's German and Poland's Polish, and we want that for, everyone. But right now, as the nature of us being Europeans and from our specific countries, we want it for us, specifically. But we want it, we as long as we understand what the future we want and we have long term goals and where we're headed toward, we nothing can stop us as long as we believe in what we believe in and we continue looking for and reinforce, and obviously, if something changes, we have to modify what our worldview. But as long as we stick to the fundamental values of us and the right of self-determination, the right of free, independent, sovereign nations, the idea of being of we want traditional family. We want the traditional social mores. And as long as we keep pushing the narrative, we will always, we will end up on top because inevitably, as we understand, we embrace human nature, and eventually, human nature will come back and manifest itself. This delusion of multiculturalism and globalism will come to an end as long as we keep, and hopefully, with enough luck, and maybe a little, dare I say, God's luck, um, we could bring a world where it doesn't just crash down and we have to like restart from the ashes, and then people have to live in suffering until they could make a better. Maybe we could turn things around and actually, before the inevitable collapse, we could actually make a world where a world that it makes sense and is sane.
yeah, I think so too. So
Yes, I guess that's where we could end it. Hey, so hey, thanks, man, so much for being on. It's been a pleasure. I'll post a link in the description where you could send it, like the link to your book on Twitter DM, and I'll just post it in the description. And yeah, so check it out, buy it, I would say. buy 5,000 books of it and give it to everyone. Uh, yeah, it's been a great honor, and it was really nice having you. I hope I was a nice guest. I hope everything went well. So yeah, I thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me, dude.
That
See
was
you
it.
next time.
See you next time, I do. Let me end the thing. Aim high, wander on from America with Russian love.